Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's ISE webinar on the findings of our Student Development Survey for 2026. We launched the survey at our development conference last week. You might have seen a bit of the press that this generated at the back end of last week. Very shortly, we'll be joining Claire and we'll be diving into the detail. I think it shows the importance of everything that's happening in the world of work at the moment, and changing emphasis on skills and the debate around the impact of AI and what that means both for actually what's happening to roles, but also about all those sort of education pathways into work and that transition and how we transition young people. So I think more than any other time that I can think of really in my career, I think the emphasis on actually the kind of skills and attributes we're developing in students and that impact of work has a profile that like I say, I can't genuinely recall. The development survey, being the nature of the content that it is, doesn't often get national press. It's normally actually very much kind of in the trade press and very much something we talk about in depth amongst our members. But yeah, I think that interest shows how important a subject this is. So just before we dive into the detail, I'll hand over to Claire. Just a reminder how events like this work with the ISE in case you haven't tuned into one before. Claire's got roughly 30-40 minutes of content that she's going to go through, but we do want this to be interactive as possible, so we engage in the functions. And if you've got any questions for Claire, we have got time at the end for questions, so please drop those into the Q&A. I'll prompt reminders as we go along. I'll kind of act as question master, so when Claire's finished, I'll pull through those questions so we can hear from yourselves as well. We really want to know what subjects you think are important and what you're picking up and what you want to know a bit more detail on. Also, we are recording this as always, so if there's anything that you want to go back and have a look at, you will get a link through to the recording. But also, please, we encourage you to share the love amongst your team. So feel happy to pass it on to your colleagues, anybody you think that might be interested in this content where it's useful for them. Please feel free to share once we send that link through, which will be later on today or possibly tomorrow. So that's enough from me. I'll sit up for a moment or two and I'll hand over to you, Claire. Claire, do you want to tell us what your fantastic findings were?
I would love to. Thanks so much, Steve. So hi, everyone. I'm Claire Tyler, Head of Insights at the ISE. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for the online launch of our ISE Development Survey 2026. As Steve mentioned, we launched the report a couple of weeks ago at our annual development conference. We had around 190 or so ISE members joining us in person. So that was our largest attendance yet for this kind of survey and for that conference. So it was great to meet everyone there. We had a mix of employers, university staff, supplier members, all gathering together to discuss the findings and the world of early careers development. So they all wanted to hear the latest trends and insights, not just from us, but also from all of the other fantastic sessions sort of run by members for members. So join us for that next year if you can, but if not, we always run webinars. And I know budgets are tight, so you can always keep an eye out for any webinars that we run for all of our surveys. So turning to today's session, again, I've looked at the delegate list. We've got a mix of employers, universities and supplier members joining us this afternoon. So hopefully you'll all have something you can take away, some useful stats or some insights, which will help you support the young people that you're working with when making their transition from education into their early careers roles. So just a little bit about me, because like I said, I've looked at the delegate list and there's lots of new names on there. So it's nice to meet you all. I'm, like I said, Claire, Head of Insights. So I oversee all of our surveys. So that's the recruitment survey, this development survey, and also any pulse surveys that we run to pick up emerging trends. I'm also, one day a week, I work as a senior research fellow at UCL. So I have sort of one foot in academia, one foot in industry. At UCL, I do lots of work about recruitment processes, big data projects about barriers to professional careers, and helping employers better target their interventions. So I can see there's some UCL representation on the session as well today, so that's great to see. And before all of that, I started at EY in corporate finance and also spent a stint at BPP, helping them launch their business school and designing degree programs and whatnot. So yeah, after having been around the early careers sector in various guises for a while, it's fantastic to be finally part of the ISE community. So nice to see you all, and we'll get started with the session. As Steve mentioned, pop your questions in the Q&A, and also any comments you want to in the chat. We like to make it interactive, so we'll come to those at the end. All right, so onto the survey then. Each year, our development survey provides an in-depth picture of how employers design, deliver and evolve their development programs for graduates and for school and college leavers. So I have some data here on the slide about who's included in the survey this year, so you can get a bit of context about how the data was collected and who's involved in the survey when I'm going through the findings. This year, the survey ran in January and February. We received 144 responses from our employers. So all the data that I'll show you in this session will be from those 144 employers, where they responded to the questions, of course. All 8 ISE employer sectors are also represented in the data. So you can see there on the chart that our surveys tend to lean slightly more towards financial and professional services and the legal sectors. So they account for around half of the sample when combined, but we do have good representation for the other sectors as well. So we can provide sector insights for those other sectors as well. Importantly, a huge thank you to all of the employers who contributed. We know it can take time to complete the surveys, so we really appreciate your support, and it's helped us pull together all these findings for the early careers community. And finally, thank you to our colleagues at the University of Derby who conducted the survey this year and analysed all the data for us. Okay, so on to the headlines then, the survey findings. This year, we've identified 5 key headlines that we'd like to share with you. Firstly, AI. AI is beginning to reshape early careers roles and skill requirements, reshape there being the key word rather than replace. And I'll take you through lots of new data that we've collected about AI and how AI is impacting early careers roles. So hopefully you'll find that useful to understand how you benchmark with your peers in terms of employers, but also for universities, so you can support young people and give them guidance about how AI is impacting their future careers. In second place, we also have data that shows that concerns about candidate quality and readiness are growing this year. So I'll show you some data about the skills that employers are recruiting for, how they rate the skills of new hires, and which skills they prioritise for development. So this year, we're using the new UK standard skills classification released by Skills England recently. You may have seen it, but if not, I'll go through a little recap of it so you all know where to look for more information about that. We also find this year, when looking at how development programmes are delivered, that they remain largely hybrid, but there is some shift back towards more time in the office and more face-to-face learning. So we'll also look at some data on hybrid working trends and how programmes are being delivered on the ground by development teams. This year, we also see that data on retention of new hires appears broadly stable, which is good news, but sadly, there are indications of rising wellbeing needs and performance-related challenges. So those trends are shaping the support strategies that employers are putting in place to support new hires. And this data comes from some new survey questions we've added this year about mental health and wellbeing of new hires. And finally, we see this year that employers are telling us that they're delivering development programs with lower overall budgets. So we'll look at some data on budgets and resourcing as well. So we'll cover each of these in turn, and I'll show you all of the data behind each one. Okay. Before we delve into the data, I do want to show you these new infographics that we have this year. Very snazzy. The aim of them really is to help signpost some of the key data points. So we have 5 of these in total, 1 for each of the headlines that I've just described, and they cover all of the key data supporting that particular headline. You can find the rest of them in the report. There are 2 more on progression and retention and resourcing and budgets. I know it's very tiny, I'm not expecting you to read it, but just so you can get a flavour of how we're delivering some of the findings this year. We've got the full report, but also some of these infographics to help you find the key stats and the benchmarks as quickly as possible. We also this year have expanded our range of development data dashboards. I don't know if you've used them in the past. In the past, we've had 4 or so dashboards each year. They're in black on the screen, covering different development approaches, apprenticeships, progression and retention. And this year, we've launched 7 new dashboards covering all of those areas in blue. So things like AI, skills, work readiness, mental health, resourcing and budgets. So all of those dashboards are now available on the ISE website. So please do explore them if you can. You can see there our marketing guru, Jessica, has done me a little GIF. So that's her exploring some of the development approach data. So essentially you click a sector and you explore the data for that sector. Or if you just want to see it overall, the data's on there overall as well. Okay. All right. So first headline then, let's crack on. This is all about AI and AI's impact on early careers roles. So what we find this year is that AI is already beginning to reshape early career roles and skill requirements. We've captured some new data this year about the impact of AI, really to try to get a sense of the scale of change that employers are experiencing. And from a university perspective, sort of crucially to give students some insight into the realities of the labour market opportunities that they'll face when they leave university and try and apply for those first jobs. You know, we've all seen the headlines, the scare stories about graduate jobs being decimated or replaced by AI. So we were keen to get an employer view on those trends and perhaps give students some reassurance about what we're seeing. So what we did find is that AI is already reshaping roles. So students are therefore sort of navigating this labour market that's evolving in real time as they're applying for roles. Employers are also concerned about the trends. They told us this year that their top concern related to AI over the next 5 years. So in fact, half of employers, 54%, are concerned about the future impact of automation and AI on new hires. So this tells us that it isn't only students who are concerned, it is also employers who are concerned for them. However, the message is sort of contrary to many of the headlines that you will have read. The survey paints a picture not of widespread job loss this year, but instead one of evolution as tasks, skills, and expectations of young people are reshaped. And we'll go through all of the data on this now. So, looking at some data then, we firstly asked employers about their current levels of AI adoption. So whether their roles have already been formally redesigned, for example, they might have rewritten job descriptions, or if roles are evolving informally. So roles are just adapting, but they haven't been formally redesigned in any way, or perhaps there's been no change at all. So the chart you can see shows this data overall in the bar at the bottom and also split by sector. So overall then, at the bottom, we can see in blue that more than half of employers, 56%, reported no changes at all yet in their roles due to AI. In contrast, in purple, 43% said that their roles had already informally evolved in response to AI. So half and half, bit of a mixed picture there. Going back, there was 1% in pink who reported that their roles have already been formally redesigned. So, you know, formally sort of redesigning roles, rewriting job descriptions, that isn't really where we're at. It's this mixed picture of either no change or informal evolution that's happening. By sector, how does it look? You can see at the top that employers in energy, engineering and industry, and also charity and the public sector, they were most likely to report no change in blue at the top. So a slower pace of adoption of AI appears to be the case in these sectors. And towards the bottom, you can see employers in retail, FMCG and tourism, and also the legal sectors being most likely to report that roles were informally adapting to AI, possibly indicating earlier adoption or more visible impact from AI in those sectors. So, like I said, a mixed picture. Lots of employers are already experiencing change, but many are yet to feel an impact. Looking ahead, however, employers do anticipate a greater impact. The headline figure that you may have seen in the press is this sort of 9 in 10 or 87% of employers who expect AI adoption to reshape entry-level roles in some way over the next 3 years. So that really gives us a sense of a consensus that this reshaping is very likely to occur. When we delve deeper into the extent of the change expected, we find that 58% of employers expect minor changes, to tasks and responsibilities, but almost a third, expect significant changes, so a much larger impact there. That's particularly in retail, FMCG and tourism, and again, the legal sector. So if you remember on the previous slide, that's where we saw the most informal evolution of roles already occurring. So lots of change already happening and expected to happen in those sectors. The final 13% expect no change at all over the next 3 years. That was particularly in the built environment sector and in energy, engineering and industry. They were least likely to report changes over the next 3 years. So as a reminder, you can get all of this data in the dashboards. As I've mentioned there, a few sector trends, but if you're in a different sector that I haven't mentioned, you can find all of that data either in the report or in the dashboards to explore at your leisure. So we've seen that most employers, those 87%, expect some change due to AI, but what proportion of roles will be replaced or reshaped? So despite the headlines, our employer evidence is a little bit more measured on this question. Firstly, looking at jobs being replaced over the next 3 years. So in blue, 40% of employers expect no job replacement over the next 3 years. And in purple, 42% expect a few roles to be replaced. By few, I mean up to around 10% of roles, so very minor. So if we add those up, we get the majority of employers, 82%, expect either no or very little job replacement due to AI. So good news for young people. Really, it supports the view that employers, by and large, aren't expecting widespread entry-level job losses due to AI. Obviously, that's 82%. There is, of course, the remaining 18% who do expect more than 10% of roles to be replaced. And again, of all sectors, retail, FMCG and tourism have the highest expectation of job replacement. There, over half of employers expect more than 10% of jobs to be replaced. So that's a sector where there's a lot going on with AI for sure already and expected in future. Moving on to reshaping, which is what we're seeing more of, you can immediately see that the data bars for no or few roles are much smaller here in blue and in purple. Only 13% expect no reshaping at all. So definitely the majority are expecting some reshaping. For everyone else, they're expecting modest rather than widespread change. So in this bar, if you add up the blue, the purple and the pink, that gets you to 72% of employers who expect fewer than a quarter of jobs to be reshaped by AI. So even though there's this consensus that reshaping is happening in terms of the proportion of roles that will be affected, fewer than a quarter of jobs appears to be the sort of consensus view at the moment in our data at least. Right, so still sticking with AI, we've talked loads about reshaping. Hopefully that's come through loud and clear. Reshaping, not replacing. But then if jobs are being reshaped, well, what does that mean? What is actually happening? What reshaping is occurring? So we were quite keen to ask employers which skills they expect to become more and less important as jobs evolve in response to AI shifts. The clearest signal from the research is that AI is changing what new hires do rather than whether they are hired. So routine tasks are declining in importance, things like admin, basic data processing, research, drafting. They're all obviously areas where our AI tools are most effective. So you'd expect that to be occurring. We really expect entry-level roles to be rebalanced slightly. So once you take away that sort of admin, basic data roles, or tasks rather, young people will be expected to move towards higher value contributions using their human skills. They'll become much more important. So employers have highlighted things like critical thinking, judgment, communication, adaptability, and responsible use of technology, all are skills that will grow in importance as roles evolve and AI adoption increases. So we also see that the ability to collaborate with AI is growing in importance, and also the skill of evaluating its outputs. That's becoming a core skill amongst employers and new hires as well. So for students and any universities on the call, this reinforces the long-standing message that technical capability is not enough. It never has been. But now we're saying that the differentiating factor for job applicants is increasingly, how they think, how they interpret, use their judgment, and apply their knowledge in a correct, appropriate way. For the education sector broadly, then, the message we're sharing is that large employers are not telling us that there are significantly fewer opportunities. It's more about the content of the roles that is shifting. So hopefully that message has come through loud and clear. Overall, we've seen that around half of employers are already experiencing some change in their roles, but over the next 3 years, the expectation is broadly modest reshaping of some roles rather than widespread job loss. So hopefully that provides some reassurance to students and careers teams. Okay. Now, onto the second headline. So here we're thinking about candidate quality and their readiness. So concerns about candidate quality and readiness are growing in the survey this year. We see that 42% of employers were concerned about the quality of candidates in future. There's lots of sort of underlying factors driving this, I think. As you'll know, we're in a scenario at the moment where students are using technology to generate tens, even hundreds of applications in some cases. Recruiters themselves are relying more heavily on technology to screen and assess candidates. So it's becoming more of a challenge to identify top performing candidates. And so there's certainly a question there as to whether this less human approach is impacting recruitment outcomes and the quality of hires. And then once you layer on top of that, the reshaping of roles, the changing expectations, we were quite keen this year to focus heavily on skills in this survey to give you some insights into which skills employers are currently recruiting for, how they rate the skills of their new hires on entry, and which skills they're developing during their programs to give you a sense of what they're prioritising for the future. So let's take you through the data. What we did when we designed the survey, we basically aligned the survey with the new UK standard skills classification that I mentioned earlier. This was released by Skills England in November and launched early this month. Steve went to the launch on behalf of the ISE. Some of you may have seen him there. And we're pleased to say that this development survey then is one of the first pieces of research to align with the new classification. So we're going to be in touch with Skills England as well about some of our findings. But a quick overview for anyone who hasn't had a chance to explore it yet. You can think of it really as a comprehensive dictionary of skills, knowledge, tasks. We all know from all our roles, all our day-to-day lives, that there are so many different ways to name and describe skills, and everyone's using different language. So this classification is the first step towards a common skills language for not only employers, but also students, job seekers, and the education sector more broadly. So it'll be interesting to see to what extent it's adopted by all those different players. But I do encourage you to give it a Google, explore it, see what it has to offer. I've added some links at the bottom of the slide there if you do manage to get hold of the slide packs from the website. You can find the Skills Explorer tool that they have on there, which I'll explain in a moment, and also the full report of how they've come about and created this new classification. But broadly, it's a huge project. They map skills, knowledge, tasks, occupations, qualifications, anything that kind of labour market nerds will love, but also in very practical terms, you can use it, if you're an employer, to write job descriptions for workforce planning, for identifying skills gaps, planning skills training, this kind of thing. And if you're a careers team, you might find it useful for showing students the skill requirements of the roles that they're interested in. They might be able to see which qualifications align with certain career paths that they're interested in. And they can explore, related roles. So they think, okay, I quite like this, but it's not quite right. I can explore different roles. It'll give you other suggestions as well. So lots of different scope for use in lots of different ways. If you're not sure where to start with it, I recommend starting in the occupation section. I did it myself, but it's quite fun to look up your own role first. It will show you the tasks that you do, the skills that you should have, and the qualifications that perhaps you've taken or might want to take to develop your expertise. So it's good to check it out, see if you agree, just to get a feel for it, and then you can explore further to see how it might be useful in your day-to-day work. So that's a plug for the standard skills classification. The part of it that we used is the core skills element. So there are many elements to the Skills Explorer, as I've described, but one of them is this specific list of 13 core skills, essentially transferable skills. There's nothing sort of groundbreaking about this language. It's just encouraging everyone to think in terms of this language for this sort of common dictionary approach. So here we've got a list of 13 core skills, common abilities required to carry out various work tasks. We've focused on this list for our report. We've also added in a couple of extra areas that are always important for recruitment for employers. So they are motivation and self-awareness, and also awareness of the wider context. So when I talk about skills in terms of our data, I'll be talking about 15 areas. So this 13 plus the 2. And I'll take you through some of that data now. So firstly, which skills are employers recruiting for at the moment? This is a new question. And even though this isn't the recruitment survey, we focused a lot on entry-level skills this year. So, given all the discussion about changing expectations of new hires, we thought this would be particularly valuable. So the top skills that employers recruit for, you can see on the chart: problem solving and decision making, working with others, motivation and self-awareness, adapting, and planning and organising. So they're the top five. It's the same top five for graduates as for school and college leavers. There are other skills, of course, that employers recruit for. So we found that over half of employers were also recruiting for awareness of the wider context, learning and investigating, and also communication skills. They were also rated very highly. However, and I'm sure this is no surprise to any of you, we also found growing concern about how candidates are using AI during the recruitment process. So 2/3 of employers are concerned that graduates might be using AI to misrepresent their skills. That's up from around half last year. So that's a trend we're definitely seeing increase year on year. It really comes back to this issue of quality that this headline's about, and raises questions about, authenticity of applications, whether new hires might be less well aligned with their roles. And if so, is there a potential impact there on employee development, on their later performance, and in fact on their well-being if they're mismatched to a role? So it isn't just a matter of using AI to get a job. There's lots of further sort of downstream effects of that mismatch potentially during the recruitment process. So that's something we're picking up in terms of recruitment. We also asked employers to rate the skills of new hires across these 15 core areas. So were they better than expected, as expected, or less than expected? Or perhaps that skill wasn't required at all at entry. So this gives us a sense of how employers rate the quality of their new hires and helps us identify some readiness gaps, really. Gaps in readiness might slow early productivity of a new hire, and it might increase the intensity of support required and put additional pressure on development teams. So it's an important area to sort of explore in a development survey. The data then shows that around 1/3 of employers rated graduates as below expectations for adapting, motivation and self-awareness, and awareness of the wider context. For school and college leavers, similar list, but some differences. The largest readiness gaps were in adaptability again, planning and organising, and awareness of the wider context. So you can see there that adaptability is top of the list for both. It's a particular area of concern for employers. It's also one of the top 5 skills, if you remember, that employers recruit for. So one of the top 5 skills recruited for, and one of the largest readiness gaps. So clearly an area for future focus, I think. And it also aligns quite heavily with our data on AI, which obviously suggests that roles will continue to evolve over the coming years, that new hires will be expected to adapt and operate in changing or ambiguous environments. So this readiness gap is possibly, quite a lot of concern, I think, for employers. Will young people be ready to move forward with that level of adaptability? All right. Moving on then to which skills employers prioritise in their development programmes once the new hire has joined the organisation. This is also a new question this year. So the top skills that employers develop. This gives us a sense of what employers are prioritising in the longer term, and skills that they want, employers to young people, to have over the first few years of their career. So it's the same list of skills, you'll notice, and it's the same list of skills for both graduates and school and college leavers. So lots of alignment there between recruitment and development priorities. So for young people making job applications, prioritising the development of these skills will put them in a really strong position during their job search. There were, again, the other skills that are developed by over 2/3 of employers. So awareness of the wider context, learning and investigating, communication skills, and also digital literacy. So you might remember that I haven't mentioned digital literacy, put my teeth in, yet. That wasn't among the top skills recruited for, but it is developed by employers. And in fact, employers are almost twice as likely to develop digital literacy during development programs as they are to recruit for those skills. So you can see there that for graduates, 37% of employers recruit for those digital skills, but 70% develop them. Similar proportions for school and college leavers. So this tells us really that employers are not seeking fully formed digital or AI experts at the point of hire. Instead, they're building these capabilities internally once the young person joins the organisation. So if students have these skills, that's absolutely fantastic, but also many employers don't require them during recruitment. So that should perhaps provide some reassurance to students who may not feel as strong in these skill areas. It also, again, feeds into this theme of adaptability being a key attribute for new hires, because students are increasingly expected to have the mindset and capacity for continuous learning and continuous upskilling when they join organisations. However, as we've seen, adaptability is an area where new hires often fall short. Okay, so still thinking about these skills then, we asked a new question this year about which AI skills employers develop during their programs, again, to give us a sense of what employers are prioritising, what they're finding important. So these are the top skills, AI skills that are embedded in training, although there are more listed in the report. The majority focus is on broader AI literacy, practical use of AI tools, using AI for communication and data tasks, rather than on technical AI skills, although technical AI skills are prioritised by some employers where the role demands them. So again, all reinforcing the idea that new hires are being developed to collaborate with AI, use it to become efficient and productive in their roles. We hear lots of employers discussing the issue of time to competence, getting that young person to be productive in the shortest amount of time. So AI is likely to be part of that solution and that strategy. So I had discussions even this week with an employer yesterday where they're assigning their new grads to work in teams, exploring how they can use AI to be more efficient for certain admin tasks that they're expected to complete as part of their role. The aim being that would then free them up for more value add or human elements of their role. So, and just to say, that particular employer was also increasing hiring volumes. So it wasn't a backdoor way of getting the young people to sort of make themselves obsolete. It wasn't part of a strategy to replace entry-level roles with AI. It was genuinely this idea of sort of time to competence and productivity and just an efficient way of working. So that's what we're hearing from employers. So still thinking about this idea of quality of new hires, skills, work readiness. We asked a new question this year about whether employers have changed the time devoted to different induction topics. So this gives us a sense really of where employers are focusing on improving the work readiness of new hires. Where do they see the largest gaps to be when young people join? What gaps do they need to plug in the first few weeks or months when a new person joins? So we found that the most increased induction topic this year is professional conduct. So that's basically supporting young people to make the transition from education into the workplace. So 52% of employers told us they've increased their focus on this during inductions this year. So that's the top bar on the chart. What do we mean by professional conduct? Really workplace mindset, behaviours, and clearly setting out employer expectations from day one. There are several reasons why an increased focus on professional conduct might be necessary at the moment, and it'll be interesting to hear if any of it resonates from your experiences, either as an employer or university member. But we think there's trends such as social media can often present, unrealistic expectations about the world of work. Young people have had reduced sort of experiences due to COVID, so less exposure to work and life experiences. Also, obviously, there's been sort of lots of success in widening participation, social mobility. So you get students from lots of different walks of lives who have had less exposure to professional expectations. So, and I've got authenticity. There's often, sort of trends to bring your authentic self to work, which is, great for diversity, but less well when you're trying to align candidates and sort of set them up against workplace expectations. So lots of sort of reasons why this might be happening. Like I said, it'll be interesting to get your thoughts on it. If you want to find out more, you can search for student to professional online. There is some work on this online. So that's professional conduct. There's some other areas that have been increased. You can see there a third of employers have increased their time on core transferable skills, and a further third have increased the time spent on mental health and well-being. So that's a topic we'll return to later in the session. Okay, so again, just taking a step back and looking at this overall focus of development activity across induction, onboarding, development activities, just to really see where our employers focusing. There's a really relatively sort of even balance of topics that employers cover across the whole breadth of the development programme. You can see there that core transferable skills, they account for the largest share. So again, not technical skills, they're a much lower percentage there. So it's sort of a bit of a balance. We've also got EDI in there, mental health and well-being, that now makes up 10% of all development activity. And we've got professional conduct there, like I mentioned, that's increased and now makes up 17% of all development activity. So in terms of quality then, sort of the overall message is that employers are largely satisfied with foundational skills. So, things like numeracy, literacy, but they do express significant gaps in workplace readiness, adaptability, motivation, self-awareness, and professional conduct. So reinforcing the need for structured development programs and also high quality work experience in advance of starting work to build those skills. Okay, so moving on to the third headline. This is all about how employers are delivering their development programs this year. We find that they're remaining hybrid, but they're shifting back towards more time in the office and face-to-face learning. So this year, 19% of employers were concerned about the future engagement and motivation of new hires. So we're going to look closely at some data on hybrid working trends and also how employers are delivering their programs to encourage that engagement from their new hires. So this year, hybrid working then remains the majority working pattern for both graduates and school and college leavers. Within that, though, we do have some shifts. So the shifts fit into broader trends that we've seen over the past few years. So here we have a chart over time of the proportion of graduates who use different working patterns, ranging from being fully office or site-based to being fully home-based. In red at the top, you can see that line is increasing. That's working 1 to 2 days a week at home. So now we have 91% of graduates working from home 1 to 2 days a week, and that's up from 72% 3 years ago. So an increase there. Further down in burgundy, you can see the line for working 3 to 4 days a week. That's been decreasing. So now we have 4% of graduates who are working at home 3 to 4 days a week. And that's down from 21% 3 years ago. So the shift for graduates really is that working patterns are moving away from working at home 3 to 4 days a week and towards 1 to 2 days a week. So essentially working fewer days at home. For school and college leavers, there are some similarities, but also some differences. At the top there, we see a slight increase this year in working at home 1 to 2 days a week. Although, as you can see, it's up, down, bit of a zigzag. It's been fluctuating in a relatively stable band between 70 and 80% in recent years. So still the majority working pattern to have 1 or 2 days a week at home for school and college leavers, but it isn't really where the main trends are. The trends are further down. You can see the green line and the burgundy line are crossing towards the bottom. What we have there is a continuing increase in being fully office and site-based. That's in green. So we have 18% of school and college leavers who are now fully office or site-based. That's up from 8% 3 years ago. And there's also a continuing decrease in working at home 3 to 4 days a week in burgundy. So again, the shifts we're seeing here again towards more in-person presence, away from working at home 3 or 4 days a week and towards either being fully office or site-based or working at home fewer days a week, 1 to 2 days a week there. So interestingly, this trend about being office-based, we don't see for graduates. We only see it for school and college leavers. So that increase in being present on site. It might reflect sort of the greater need for supervision or hands-on learning with some of the non-graduate pathways. Okay, so we've seen that working patterns are shifting back towards more time in the office. And we see a similar trend, in fact, for training and delivering the development content. Looking at the balance of delivery time this year during development programs, we see that employers are delivering development face-to-face 2/3 of the time. And that's a significant rise from just 28% 4 years ago. Employers also deliver programs online 1/4 of the time and through coaching or mentoring 10% of the time. Face-to-face delivery is also rated as the highest quality development approach by 3/4 of employers. Again, a large increase here, steadily up from half of employers 2 years ago. So again, just this recognition that face-to-face is the way to go at the moment. We also see an increase in new hires being very much on board with that. They're more willing to attend the office or in-person training, and that's reported by 1/3 of employers this year, reinforcing the shift back to more face-to-face time. And just to add in some new data on a related question that we asked this year, we find that employers on average say that new hires spend 3/4 of their time learning on the job and 1/4 of their time in structured learning activities. All right. In terms of this sort of face-to-face theme again, continuing the theme, employers have also increased their focus on classroom learning this year. So both online learning and classroom learning for delivering, development content, they're both very popular for employers when delivering development content. So over 90% of employers use online or classroom learning. But what we do see is that the classroom, that percentage of a classroom was 80% last year. So that's basically increasing. Classroom learning is rising up the ranks. What we also see is quite interesting is that employers don't find online learning very impactful. So even though it's very popular, it's not considered very impactful. So only 8% of employers find online learning impactful, and that's been a steady decrease. And whereas 60% of employers find classroom learning impactful, and that's been on the increase over the last few years. So yeah, broadly there with, again, lots of different sort of data points, but broadly together it's showing this increase on face-to-face presence for working patterns, and also delivery of development content is also being more delivered more face-to-face and in person and in classroom settings. Okay, moving on to our fourth headline. These last two are a little bit shorter. This one's all about retention and support this year. So retention of early careers hires, it's a really important indicator for employers to assess the effectiveness of their development activity, really to measure the return on investment of their early careers programme. So this year we found that sort of good news, retention of new hires remains broadly stable, but there are rising wellbeing needs and performance-related challenges, and they're all shaping support strategies that employers are putting in place. This year, over a third of employers told us they're concerned about future retention and also concerned about manager capability to support the new hires. So obviously line managers, they're a crucial part of the support for young people. And I'll give you an update on some retention figures, and then I'll show you some new data about the mental health and wellbeing trends of new hires that we have. All right, so looking at retention then, here we have a chart showing retention after 3 years for graduates in pink and school and college leavers in green over time. We've only got half a line there for school and college leavers because we started collecting it in 2019. So this year you can see on the right-hand side that employers expect to retain around 3/4 of their new hires after 3 years. That's 74% of their graduates and 76% of their school and college leavers. So that's after 3 years. Obviously, there's various trends in there. There's been sort of a slight increase in the last few years, but broadly we think this is all sort of levelling out, heading back to previous levels, but not quite as high as some of the sort of 80% or so retention we saw over a decade ago. But sort of nothing much to see this year in terms of retention. Around about 3/4 of young people are retained in their job after 3 years. Looking over a slightly longer time frame, retention at 5 years is slightly lower, as you'd expect. That's around 2/3. So employers retain around 63% of their hires after 5 years. It of course varies by sector. We have energy, engineering and industry and built environment. They have the highest retention rates, and legal, digital and IT, in fact, it's not on the slide, but they have the lowest retention rates in our data this year. And again, you can see all of that on the dashboards. Each year we also collect some data on why staff move on as part of our retention insights. It just helps employers plan and sort of create interventions where required. So this year the most common reason for leaving was moving to a similar role in a different company. We find 2/3 of employers reported that. We also found that 30% of employers told us that staff leave due to being dissatisfied with pay. That's less of an issue this year. That was 42% last year. We think perhaps it's just the job market. Perhaps people are deciding to stay put, but that's a slight decrease. And interestingly, we also find this increased concern about performance issues. So again, feeding into this headline. So almost a third of employers told us that performance issues are a common reason why employees leave. And that's actually been steadily increasing every single year over the last 3 or 4 years. So something really to keep an eye on. Sort of wellbeing trends, but also performance issues are coming through quite strongly in terms of retention issues. So if we take a look at the mental health piece, we've added this as a new question this year. Obviously, mental health of young people is a huge issue, a huge topic more broadly in terms of policy. But we wanted to collect some data from employers to see what the trends were in early careers specifically. So here I'm showing you some data for graduates, but just so you know, the data for school and college leavers is almost identical. So these mental health issues are really affecting new hires across the board. We asked employers whether these mental health issues that are listed have increased or decreased in the past year, or whether there's been no change. The results show that half of employers saw increased anxiety amongst new hires, a third reported increased career uncertainty and financial pressure, and a fifth reported increased perfectionism and burnout. So, as you'll know, this likely reflects the wider context in which students are making career choices. the uncertainty about the future of work, how roles are evolving. All of this can amplify existing pressures, and that's particularly the case for those who feel less prepared to enter the world of work. So from a development point of view, supporting young people to build confidence, resilience, a sense of agency to navigate these uncertainties is becoming increasingly important, coming through in our data. And again, it brings us back to this theme of adaptability to navigate these challenges. That's becoming a new core skill for new hires. In terms of the support then that employers are putting in place, it feels that employers they're very much aware of all of these challenges faced by their new hires. So if you're an employer on the call, none of this probably will be new to you, and you'll have sort of systems in place to support students through these challenges. But what we find here is these are the top 5 support strategies that employers are using. Dark pink shows where an employer has provided the support, and light pink shows where they found it to be effective. So the one point that I will pull out here is, again, about mental health, that 3/4 of employers provide mental health support and counselling, but fewer, only 64%, find that effective. So providing good quality mental health support does feel like an important challenge, but also one where some employers are currently grappling with to try and improve the provision that they have in that area. We've already seen that around 1/3 of employers increased the induction time for mental health and wellbeing this year, so it now accounts for 10% of all development activities. So again, pulling together these different threads of data shows us that the issue of mental health support is very much likely to continue to be a priority for young people and for development teams, especially in this climate of change and uncertainty. All right, so on to the final finding before we move on to some Q&A. This is all about budgets and employers. So employers are delivering early career development with lower overall budgets. It's a top concern of employers this year. 37% of employers told us they're concerned about future internal cost pressures and budget constraints. And a further 21% of employers are concerned about the future economic climate. So budget and resourcing is high on employers' lists of concerns this year. Overall, the typical development budget this year, excluding staff costs, was £180,000. So that is 10% lower than last year's benchmark figure. But then you might expect some decrease since hires are also down, as we reported in our recruitment survey in October. So once you take that all in the round, cost per hire is broadly stable this year, and it continues to hover around the £4,000 mark. Of course, there are variations per sector. The legal sector has the highest cost per hire at over £8,000, and the built environment reports the lowest at around £1,000. Obviously, all of this is also in the dashboards. In terms of budget spend, split by programme, as you might expect for our ISE membership, the largest share goes to graduate schemes. That's 55% of development budgets are spent on graduates. School and college leavers and apprentices make up another 30%, and intern and placement students make up 12%. And that's all in the same ballpark as last year. So lots of stability there, despite the budget, the overall budget being down, cost per hire and allocation of budgets is broadly stable. While we're discussing budgets, I thought you might like to see this data we've added this year about how development teams themselves are using AI. I'm sure there'll be a link to budgets here and the pressure to do more with less. So this year, over half of employers and development teams are using AI themselves during their development programs. So most often to support content creation, but also to deliver or personalize learning content or assess progress of new hires. And finally, in terms of budgets, we also continue to collect data on team size and the number of new hires, just to help development teams benchmark their activity. So as last year, a typical development team consisted of 4 people, no change there, that's the bar on the right, and it varies by sector, ranging from 6, being the largest, in the charity and public sector, down to 2 in health and pharma and retail, FMCG and tourism. And you can also see that within teams, each team member is responsible for 13 new hires, and that's also broadly stable if you look at a consistent sample across years. All right, so that was a whistle-stop tour. Just to wrap up then, a few final thoughts. The survey this year shows us that early careers remains a critical pipeline. AI is changing what early career hires do, rather than whether they are hired. We also see that adaptability, self-awareness, motivation, and workplace readiness are now essential for success in this ever-changing world. And we also saw that more impactful delivery, often face-to-face, is being prioritised to strengthen supervision, collaboration, those workplace behaviours, professional conduct, and support those mental health and wellbeing challenges that we saw where they arise. All right, so that's the whistle-stop tour of the trends we see this year. I'll now hand back to Stephen to explore if we have any questions. Over to you, Stephen.
Thank you, Claire. A great in-depth analysis of the content of that report. I would encourage you all to go online as well and have a look at the report in more detail. Obviously, there's a limit to how much we can squeeze into a webinar. So actually, there's a lot more depth actually within the pages of the report. So I would encourage you to do that. So we have got some time for some questions. We've got this booked until 3:30 if we need that time. I've had one comment so far, Claire. Comment more than a question, actually, but I'm interested to know your take on it. And somebody's talking about actually this whole idea of professional conduct. It's a theme that does come up again, not only in the survey but also in the roundtables that we host. The comment is around hybrid learning. Actually, as hybrid learning becomes more common, students have fewer opportunities where they're actually face to face, and I guess practicing, the way of interacting with people, working with people on a day-to-day basis. Any thoughts on that? And actually, if there's anything that we can do about that, because I guess as there's an argument that AI will actually take away some of the more mundane tasks. So actually it becomes more important that people can interact with others and use their judgment and create, consensus in terms of what to do or what not to do around various projects, etc. And I guess there's a danger that actually the hybrid piece on campus pulls away from that. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, when we delivered this at the conference, we followed up the sort of lecture session, if you like, the delivery of findings sessions with some round tables where we all got into tables. We discussed the findings with employers, and some things came out which are related to this point. So it was specifically around hybrid, about young people learning online, and it was this sort of mismatch potentially between how students at university are encouraged to interact online when they have lectures or sessions at university versus how they're encouraged to interact online when they're in a workplace role. And a lot of it was about having your camera on and sort of expectations around this. So it was a law firm I was talking to, and they were saying that often there'll be these sort of big meetings they'll have at work, and young people will often just have their camera off. So a lot of this is preference, and I know there's sort of neurodiversity and sort of disability and accessible reasons why people might not want to, but broadly they were saying from an employer perspective that they're seeing young people enter the workforce sort of working online but not interacting online. So they'll be online but they'll have their camera off. Sometimes they're there, sometimes they've disappeared. That's a different question. But they were saying that it would be great if at universities could encourage young people to have their cameras on. So when there's a lecture, when there's a workshop, anything like this. So that was just one sort of specific, I guess, example of where there was a bit of a mismatch, where I guess hybrid learning's happening at universities, and perhaps students can have their camera off and sort of passively, sort of interact. That's the wrong word. Passively take in the content. Whereas when they're in the workplace setting, even if you're not actively contributing, often you're expected to have your camera on and be present and shown to be attentive, as if you were in the room with these people. And I think that's the difference. So that's something that was coming through from some of the conversations at the conference, if that's helpful.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Because you can imagine having a webinar like this. Actually, people don't have cameras on. It's mostly, it's absorbing information apart from the moment we're in now. But actually, as we know, in work, most of the time it does involve a level of interaction. I've got from Hannah's popped a question in the chat. I'll come back to that in a sec. I was just wondering because I was quite surprised by a couple of the roundtables that we've hosted recently. People talking about actually trying to increase the level of hiring through interns and placement programs. And the reason I say I was a bit surprised to hear that is that actually normally in a period where we're in, where the labour market is tight, I mean, there's been not great job stats come out again today, employers don't really tend to invest in those kind of programs that require at least more opportunity cost, if not cost. Are you seeing any links between, I guess, maybe some of the information we get in our recruitment survey or some of that work readiness employers trying to improve that by going into more early identification programs?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I think a lot of it's linked to application volumes and sort of trying to convert, a higher proportion of their interns. We're seeing it. There's been articles in the press about it. I remember there being an article in the Times specifically about it a few months ago. I think certainly there is a trend towards early identification or higher conversion of your existing programs where you can. In the forthcoming recruitment survey, we're actually going to include more questions about application volumes and mitigation strategies, and early identification is one of the options there, that employers are using to try and, if you like, get down application volumes, when in fact in the past application volumes used to be, sort of a source of pride. Now there's something to sort of to be trying to reduce them because it's just so overwhelming. But yes, so I suppose we're seeing that probably from an application management point of view. And also it's just an efficiency point of view. You've invested quite a lot in those young people and it makes sense to convert them where you can. There's also an interesting angle from a diversity perspective as well, which is that, a lot of these schemes are used for diversity purposes. So if you can, they're ring fenced. So if you can convert a high proportion of young people from them, then that will, assuming they are diverse intakes themselves, then they can obviously supplement the diversity of your intakes more broadly. So there's an angle there as well.
Definitely, and our data in the past has shown that actually those who come through those programs, the return is better in terms of retention and performance, etc. Right, we've got some more stuff coming through. So, question from as I mentioned from Hannah. So Hannah's talking about the cost per hire figures. Does that include levy funds drawn down on the levy, or do we separate that out?
Let me go back to you, Hannah. I can't remember. I can't remember. And we just ask. We don't specify it specifically in the cost per hire. We just exclude staff costs because of the complications there with different approaches. I guess it would be up to each individual employer to sort of decide for themselves. We can have a think about that actually, and how it might affect reporting of data.
I think it's outside it. Just a bit of background to cost per hire. It's the same in the recruitment cost per hire.
Yeah.
Everybody has so many different ways of actually running their teams, outsourced, insourced, your staff costs, you don't know your staff costs. So generally what we say is give us your L&D budget or your recruitment budget, and we divide that by the number of hires or the number of programs. So it's a crude measure, but it's a very good sort of way of at least knowing if you're in the right area of the ballpark on that. So, yeah, as Claire said, we can come back to you on that one.
Good point. Thanks, Anna.
Cool. Another question here. So, has any analysis been undertaken on results from previous years? So, this question is really looking at trends, and are there, any opportunities, respondents, where we get qualitative data as well as actually the quantitative data that we put into the survey?
No, we tend not to. It's a bit of a mixed bag, really. Where we can, we try and always ask for, obviously, quantitative responses. They're multiple choice questions. We try and preempt what responses might be and include as many of them as possible in the multiple choice question. But we do give options for, if there's an other response, then we do ask for that data, and we do read it and review it to give us some context. But in answer to your question specifically, no, we haven't gone back and looked at any of those responses over time, broadly because they're very patchy. We don't specifically ask employers to fill in text boxes. It's more of a, if you have any other thoughts or you take a different approach, pop it in here. So there wouldn't be too much in there. But no, it's a good question. I think, it's something we could come back to. If there's any sort of particular topics you think would be quite ripe for qualitative questions, then by all means get in touch. It would be interesting to talk about it.
Yes, definitely. And of course, that's the reason we run sessions like this. We actually, we don't just do the development survey, launch it, and then kind of forget about it till next year. It very much, is a backdrop to a lot of the forum conversations we'll be having, because it is interpreting this data and what it means. Because I think one of the things that I'm noticing is that, yes, there are trends and movements in the market, but actually, let's just take AI, for example. Some jobs are changing very clearly and very quickly, whereas others, it's less about a core job change. So actually, there's a limit to how much depth we can go to, isn't there? Right, I'll keep going with this because we've got a few minutes left, and we've got a couple more comments coming through. So Gabriella from Boeing made a comment talking about one of the issues they faced last year was lack of attendance at person development events. This is something I've also heard of, where And I wonder if this is a continuation of student behaviour whereby, not every student is perfect and turns up to every lecture, particularly if some of it's online, then maybe bringing some of that behaviour into work and just dropping out the day before, thinking that, training is optional. If something better or more important has come along. So Gabriel's interested if anybody's hearing more of the same. I don't know. Is that something that you picked up at all, Claire?
Yeah, I think it's just this general point about professional conduct. And when we saw the increase, this sort of half of employers have increased their focus on professional conduct this year. On its own, it's hard to say, is that because professional conduct of young people has got worse? Or is it that employers have just, are now realizing that this is an important area to focus on? It's probably a bit of both, right? And like I said, there were lots of reasons why there might be this sort of increasing gap between students and sort of employee expectations in their professional conduct, all that stuff like, social media expectations, COVID, more hybrid working or working at home. This diversity angle as well, where you have people from all sorts of different working backgrounds who haven't had access to sort of role models or experiences. So there's lots of reasons why this might be sort of broadening. So yeah, I think it's an interesting point, and it's something that's coming through very strongly in the survey. And I think it'll be good now for us to get some more context around it and sort of specific examples. But I also think it's might be hard. It's probably quite easy to set the expectations. It's probably quite easy for employers to just set the expectations and say from day one, this is what we expect. It might take obviously longer to actually move the young people's behaviour to be in line with that. But I think the first step is obviously setting those expectations. And indeed, in the roundtable discussions at the conference, the employees I was speaking to, they were saying that is one of the core things that they will absolutely, include in their induction, rather than some of the pre-work. Sometimes you can, with cost savings, what have you, you can take out content in your induction and put it as pre-work so that your induction is more cost efficient, perhaps a day less than it was in the past. So we were talking about what's core in your induction. A lot of that was expectation setting, professional conduct, our values, and how you operate, as a member of staff in this organisation. This is who you need to be and what you need to do. So I think employers are coming down very strongly on that as being a core part of inductions now.
Yeah, I agree with that. Interestingly, it was one of the conversations on the roundtable that I was at our development conference, because we were talking about levels of work experience in schools and changes in actually changes in the experiences of young people, how they move through education into work, very different to maybe a generation ago. And actually, one of my pushes back to employers, we were talking about schools need to do more work, give more work experience opportunities, but then as employers need to deliver that work experience as well. They can't be magicked up out of thin air. So there does seem to be something in this whole area around actually connecting work to education and pathways.
Yeah, and I would say as well, we don't want to ever sound like we're sort of blaming students for any of this. It's, of course, students are sort of a product of the system they've been through. So it's more joining up sort of the university sector and employers, I think, to make sure that these expectations from work are communicated earlier, I guess, to careers teams and sort of university, teams delivering academic content, so that young people know at university this will be the expectation when they move into the workforce. Young people need to be told what the expectations are. We can't expect them to know these things, especially if you're hiring these more diverse intakes now. For sure.
I agree. And I've talked about it in the past, but actually, I find the work that Bobby Duffy's done out of King's as on generation differences very much around delayed adulthood and those social changes. I really think we see that impacting on work. So it's not blaming the students, but it's thinking actually, well, what's different now compared to maybe how these processes worked in the past. But that's a whole other rabbit hole we'll go down.
Indeed. Can I plug some events, Stephen, before we wrap up?
Yeah, please do. There's a bit more on the chat which you can have a look at. Bit of there's not so much questions, but people talking about, again, more about professionalism. Interesting question around actually, if somebody does a degree apprenticeship, do they join a graduate program after that degree apprenticeship when they leave, or are they then, I guess, in civvy streets, as I used to say it? Hannah gave the example that they're on a graduate program but don't necessarily do some of the training. Again, I'm sure that's different employer by employer, and also some comments, Dan, Aaron, etc., Ian, about who's got the responsibility for that development. And I think it's all of us as a sector, would be my take on that. But yes, so please continue these conversations at the forums we have. If you've got any more questions for us on this, please bring myself or Claire an email. We're happy to chat about this in more depth. But yes, Claire, do you want to just close us off with the what next bit that you're going to talk to us about?
Perfect. So the what next is please download the survey. The survey is now live and available to access and download. You can use this QR code should you wish to, or you can just go to the ISE website and find it there. You'll find all those infographics that I mentioned, lots of new signposting this year to help you navigate your way around the report, as I know there's an awful lot to digest. So hopefully you'll enjoy reading the key themes and perhaps dig into some of the data in areas that are of particular interest to you. You can also explore the new dashboards, so go and check those out as well. They're also on the website. And finally, a little plug for some events we have coming up. We've got the annual recruitment conference and gala awards dinner in June in Brighton, so please do join us for that if you can. It's always a fun and informative event. And we're also soon launching our annual recruitment survey for employers. So that looks at trends in early careers hiring. We'll be launching the results from that survey in October, and the link for the webinar is already live, so you can sign up for the launch webinar should you wish to. The survey itself launches on Monday, the 15th of June. So that's the day that employers will receive a link to complete the survey. So if you're an employer, please keep an eye out for that. You can sign up for these events and more, all at the ISE events calendar. All right, that's me. I'm done. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you being here and for all your comments and interaction. Hope you find the report informative. And as always, get in touch if you have any questions or indeed any recommendations or ideas for next year, because we do this for you. So please let us know what data you would like to see. All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Claire. Yeah, just to reinforce that, those who follow the survey closely will see that we do adapt and evolve it continually as our market changes. So your feedback is really important. And a double plug really for the recruitment conference. I can't believe it's only a month away. We are, of course, conscious that budgets are tight. It is a challenge, but actually it's also a very challenging market we're operating in. A lot of the themes we've been talking about today, really rich themes of conversation, real challenges that people are dealing with. A lot of that will form the basis of the content. So it would be great to see you in Brighton if you can make it. And as I said at the start, you will download the survey, but also you will get a copy of the recording. So if you want to go back any of this, you can, to have a bit of a recap, or if you do want to pass that link on to colleagues within your organisation, please do so. Hopefully see you all in Brighton, if not before. Thank you very much. So Claire, thank you very much for a great summary of your hard work on the development survey. Much appreciated.
You're welcome. Thanks all for joining us. See you all soon in person sometime.